Welcome to Just Relationships, the show that offers you concrete ways to make your relationships better. Whether it's your boss, your spouse, your children, or your friends, the quality of your relationships in life directly affects how you feel about yourself and the success you achieve. Your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer, a psychotherapist, telecoach, author, and seminar leader, will interview top experts to help you learn to manage this essential part of your life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer.
Greetings to you. If you tuned in last week, you know that we are in part 2 of the whole concept of dealing with trauma. What do you do after the trauma has occurred? And it's not so much the fact that you had a trauma as what you do with that. And then we've heard the term post-traumatic stress disorder since forever. It's like, this is what happens. You're traumatized and you're stressed, and that's it. That's your life. Now we move into surviving and thriving. And Dr. Randall Bell is here with us for part 2 of our series. And Dr. Randall Bell, author of Post-Traumatic Thriving, the Art, Science, and Stories of Resilience. Welcome back, Dr. Bell.
Well, Dr. Duffy, it's nice to be back. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're so welcome. And we looked last week at the 3 concepts of dive, survive, and thrive. And the diving aspect is where you're in a total state of shock and denial, and you move into bargaining and depression, and you're really jolted and catapulted by the trauma. By definition, we don't expect trauma. It happens to us. It can either be a surgery, as you and I have had. It can be long-term chronic disease. It can be circumstances, war, other people betraying us, death, anything. And so my guess, Dr. Bell, is that a lot of people are living in this survival mode. What do you think?
Yeah, some people get back to survival. I think what concerns me is a lot of people stay in the dive mode. They never really recover from their trauma. So I actually have a lot of respect for people that get back and to survive and get back to where they were. That's an accomplishment in and of itself, I think.
Well put. Well put. We have survived, and many people think of themselves as surviving, and they don't even realize that the next step is thriving.
Yeah.
So I love that. So how does a person know if they're still in the dive mode?
Well, I think the key giveaway is if they're self-medicating in some way. That keeps us in the dive mode. Survival gets, it's just that. It gets back to the baseline, what life was like before the trauma. But if you're self-medicating with any of the host of things we all know about, that's a signal that we're trying to cover up and mask something. Not that and that can be okay. That for a while. I mean, I know somebody who got drunk every night, and she's glad she did, because if she weren't drunk, she would have committed suicide.
Yes.
So, we want to suspend the judgments, but if you get stuck in self-medication, it's time to maybe reach out for some help.
And you talk about the substance aspect of self-medication, and you also talk about the more subtle kinds. And last week you mentioned workaholism. So I love how you address that we can self-medicate not only by overeating or boozing and drugging, but what would be other ways that people self-medicate besides the obvious of drugging?
I think anytime you get into any kind of dogmatic belief system, whether it be politics or religion or self-help groups, where you start deluding yourselves that I'm right, you're wrong, there's no view other than my view, that can be a form of self-medication. Anger addiction is another one, where people, let's watch the evening news and just get infuriated and and road rage is another. Those are all signs of addictions to anger, but it's all addiction to one thing or another, whether it's self-delusion with, I'm right to the exclusion of everybody else being wrong, or workaholism. They all have the same mechanics. They're basically all masking reality.
They're all masking reality. And also there's a chemical change when we have, as you call, the unnatural high versus the natural high.
Yeah.
So it's hard to believe that when a person gets angry, the adrenaline shoots into their system. And so you get happy from being a workaholic? Well,
you certainly can. You get a shot of dopamine and, all the other neurotransmitters and endorphins and hormones. But the thing is that are you getting, and I'm all for getting high. In fact, I have a video on our website about how to get high. I even in my volunteer work with the homeless shelter, I tell the folks there, I want you to get high, but there's an authentic way to get high and there's a counterfeit way of getting high. So the stuff we just talked about, the drugs, the alcohol, workaholism, anger addiction, those are all counterfeit highs. The authentic way to get high is through, exercising, a passion with art or music, reading something, inspiring. Those are the ways to get authentic highs. And I'm really trying to get people from the self-medication and to self-care in all those forms, because those are healthy and they're non-addictive as well.
Yes. And to get someone out of, I don't know, what animal puts their head in the sand? What animal is that? The stork?
That's the ostrich, I think.
Oh, what? The stork, the ostrich. Yeah, head in the sand, and to get their head out of the sand, and then if your head gets out of the sand, then you do experience the fire, right? Mm-hmm. And then to move into another passion, right? Dancing, drawing, doing art, listening to music, reading quality things. That's quite a shift, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a major shift. And actually, one of the guys in the book who shares a story is the gentleman that actually came up with the term post-traumatic stress disorder. He was a Vietnam vet. He came back from Vietnam. I actually met him because we were speaking in Santa Barbara, and I gave my speech. It was okay. And then he got up. He was the last speaker, and he just blew the doors off the event. And I realized I was sitting next to the guy that actually came up with the term the whole time. But he put his passion was helping other vets. And he's really put together, I think, 100 buildings across the country that are dedicated to helping veterans process their trauma. That was his high, which is obviously very, very healthy and has helped millions of veterans process their trauma. So finding your passion, whatever it is really the end game. That's where we want to land when we kind of process this stuff.
That's the end game. So tell us more about, so we're in there surviving. I love how you put that, how you frame that. That's a big deal already, to get out of dive into survive.
Yeah.
That's big. Get back to the baseline. So tell us more. Then what happens if you want it to happen? Yeah,
well, I mean, it's those two foundational things with sitting in the fire, finding somebody to talk to, and just like you and I are doing. You talked about last week with heart issues. I had a congenital heart defect. So just opening up and talking about it, because I went for decades, I don't know about you, but I went for decades where I didn't want to talk about it. I did not talk about it unless I absolutely had to. And then we talked about, talking about it. And then the other one to kind of help thrive, I brought another visual aid. And I went to India and I'm into this, the meditation stuff, where I learned it in San Quentin prison because I was so impressed with these convicted criminals. And there was everything in the room, from kidnapping, murder, rape, bank robbery. It was all there in this little room. And yet these guys had processed it so well, they wouldn't hurt a fly. And it was really very, very genuine. And so the meditation practices, those two things will get us into the thrive stage. There are other things in the book because there's a lot of options and a lot of fun things to experiment with. But really, getting into thrive starts with having what we discussed a little bit before is having a faith in some higher power. That is usually the shift into thriving, as I see it. And the academic literature really kind of backs that up.
Isn't it wonderful that we actually have backup now to all these spiritual concepts that we've had for centuries?
It really is. And some people have this notion that science is always, displacing more and more religion, and religion's shrinking and science is growing. That's nonsense. They both work together. You read Einstein and he talks about a combination of science and religion is where you get the very best answers. And Buddhism has known about meditation for thousands of years. And Sarah Lazar out of Harvard, in just the last 10 years or so, has published about a dozen articles about the benefits of meditation. So science is rapidly catching up to what spirituality has known for thousands of years. So it works both ways. And once we embrace both of them, I think we're going to get the best answers.
So a kind of, in a way, a personal question, maybe not. When Einstein, one of my favorite quotes of his is that at some point we can make a decision about, is the universe basically favorable or unfavorable? And that makes all the difference. And I always say, of course, the universe is favorable. But what does that really mean to believe in a favorable universe?
Yeah, well, I think there's yin and yang. There's light forces and dark forces. And if anybody that says there's no such thing as evil, I would like to take him to some of the disasters I've seen, because I've seen, pure evil. The thing that amazes me is, and I think that the essence of Einstein's quote is that no matter how dark it is, no matter how ugly it is, and I've been to sites that are just beyond horrific, where horrible things happen, the love is always bigger. The outpouring from the community is always bigger. So love always trumps the hate, always, without exception. And I think that's the essence of connecting with the fact that, yeah, there's bad stuff going on, but the good stuff by far outweighs it, and having an appreciation for that rather than being wallowing in cynicism and negative thinking. The love, the positive, always outweighs the bad.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad I asked, Dr. Randall Bell. I am so glad I asked. Okay, so our audience did not see your sounding bowl, but I did. So do you want to tell us about that, the sounding bowl, what on earth that is?
Well, sure. The research from Sarah Lazar at Harvard is basically the deep breathing exercises, whether it's meditation, grounding, whatever you want to call it. It resets the brain, because in the last episode, we talked about the three brains, the reptilian, mammal, and human brain, and that traumas are stored in the instinct reptilian brain where we fight, flight, or freeze. Meditation or grounding literally and measurably resets the brain. You can actually do, Sarah Lazar, Dr. Lazar out of Harvard, has measured brains before and after meditation and can actually physically measure the growth in the brain in healthy areas. And so as simple as it is to just close your eyes and breathe deeply, however people want to, do their own grounding exercises, up to them. And as simple as it is, it has measurable results. That's why I'm such a big proponent of it.
So for the lay person, it sounds esoteric when we first heard of transcendental meditation 50 years ago. It was like weird, and you had your mantra and you weren't supposed to tell anybody because that would lose the sacredness of it, and very, very mysterious. So can you demystify it for us, Dr. Randall Bell?
Sure. The most demystified, pragmatic way is when I went into San Quentin prison and meditated for the first time. What they do is they just close their eyes, and some of the inmates are not comfortable closing their eyes, and that's okay. Just fixate on a certain point with your eyes open. But the idea is to turn off what in Eastern society calls the monkey mind, and in Western society we call it anxiety of the past, and regrets and guilt over the past, and the anxieties over the future, and worrying about the future, and focus on right now. And by deep breathing, that is the most effective way of kind of getting us, focusing on now rather than the past, rather than the future. And just deep breathing exercises, I think those exercises are like 10 minutes, maybe 7 minutes. But all you do is simply breathe in, breathe out. And then you can do a body scan where you start at your toes and just kind of focus, hey, do my feet feel good or do they feel bad? And then up the legs to the knees, and then on the way up to the top of the head. That's one way. Another way is to just look at concentrate on each of the 5 senses. What do I taste right now? What do I smell right now? What do I hear and see and touch? And each one at a time. There's lots of ways to do it. There's no right or wrong. It's not like it's a competition. There's no, there's no awards or trophies for this stuff. And they all work. Some of it's more spiritual. Some of it's very, very secular. What we do in prison is very secular. There's no spirituality to it at all. But the fact that you do that exercise maybe a couple times a day, it resets the brain from that triggered fight, flight, freeze mode more to the human logical, calm, restorative process.
Wow. For all that, all you have to do is just take a breath, right? Yeah. sit quietly, be still. Mm-hmm. Don't do anything, which is what we think in the Western world. I'm not doing anything. Therefore I'm not productive. And what could be more productive than just sitting, right? Sitting and being. And what makes it so difficult for Westerners? The idea of living in present time, just feeling present to yourself in a moment. What do you think that's about?
Well, Westerners have a problem, but we don't have a monopoly on it because the Eastern cultures have the exact same problem, only that they have a better solution. Our solution to anxiety here is pop more pills. And I'm all for medication when it's reasonable and prescribed and under a doctor's care, and we don't get carried away with it. But it's the same problem. But I think the Eastern cultures have got a better edge on this with the meditation because they recognize that if we focus on the past and the regrets and guilt and shame of the past, or we're worried about the future, are we going to have enough money for this? Are we going to have enough time for that? And focus on right now, that in and of itself, as simple as it is, has a very real healing value to it. And in Western society, I've had innumerable medical doctors tell me that a lot of people are in the hospital because of what's going on in their head. And that manifests into all kinds of diseases. And if people will get rid of the anxiety, a lot of the blood pressure will go down and a lot of the other problems kind of self-correct. So, or at least the medications get reduced. So it's a holistic thing. And the idea that we can harbor all this stress and all this unresolved trauma and that our body's going to be healthy is a delusion. We gotta address these things. The problem is, Dr. Duffy, we don't teach this stuff in school. and yet unresolved trauma, particularly childhood trauma, is the number one problem on planet Earth. The violent crimes in the prisons, that's because these guys grew up in dysfunctional families and never resolved their childhood trauma, and that manifested in a violent crime. So we really got to get at this stuff.
Wow, I couldn't agree with you more, Dr. Bell. And yet the political climate, the idea of teaching how to deal with trauma in school, I can see how people could resist that. Like, oh, now you're telling my child they're traumatized. well, it must be me. But I'm a good parent. Well, oh my goodness. So how can we bridge this gap of being able to talk about trauma, to learn how to deal with trauma?
Yeah. Well, I think we're doing it by talking about it and using your platform to share with your audience. And I love the conversation because I think we're getting at humanity's number one problem. And I think just stirring it up and education in all its forms. You're right. The political climate, particularly with schools, can be so whatever it is that we're teaching kids, algebra that they'll never use. And yet these practical skills are what are essential, and it gets politicized and all the other nonsense. But the reality is, this is just an important conversation. I'm just really glad we're happening in our own little way. I think we're helping a little bit.
Oh, I love that, Dr. Randall Bell. We definitely are helping. That makes me. I think you're right. Yeah, and. So tell us more. I had mentioned in the beginning of the first show about trauma with a small t, developmental trauma, rather than we think about catastrophizing, but a real catastrophe. And of course, I'm sorry, I wanted to just also make reference when you talked about meditation, that so many of us catastrophize and futurize, and there is such fear of the breakdown of Western civilization, right, in the world as we know it, and loss of just everything, and we have to somehow, I think, not figure out how to not be thrown into that cauldron. And at the same time, be aware and do our part, like talk about it, like don't use plastic, educate ourselves, the right education for ourselves. So what would you say about that? The idea of being aware and being proactive, of course, and doing what we can.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I mean, just being aware and talking about it is really the first step, because the more we have the conversations about the fact that, unresolved traumas exist, I can tell you, even the most macho, violent offender in prison yearns to have this conversation. Because let me tell you, even though they're all tatted up and acting tough and all that, I've had a lot of conversations with these guys, and they're so traumatized in prison, they're wetting the bed. I mean, it's embarrassing how much anxiety they have. The other reality is that given, at least where I am in California, these guys get paroled. So do we want them paroled and reoffending and without their traumas being addressed, or do we want them being paroled truly rehabilitated, where they don't want to hurt anybody? All they want is a simple job to pay their bills and get along and never go back to jail or prison ever again. Of course, we want people that are rehabilitated, and the real conversations that are happening are exactly the conversations we're having right here. So they're incredibly important on a lot of levels, not just in terms of mental health, but economically, financially, socially, across the spectrum. When we address these issues of unresolved trauma, we're really addressing all the fallout, the violent offenses and the drug addictions, alcoholism, and DUIs, and all that nonsense are all symptoms. The real problem is what we're talking about: unresolved trauma.
The real problem is unresolved trauma, and I think we are just beginning now to have a serious forum for it, and without judging. And, our prison system, unlike a lot of Scandinavian countries, is still so punitive. And and the idea of rehab. Why should we be nice to heinous people? And we should pay money for. I hate to be a devil's advocate, Dr. Randall Bell. I'm sorry, but I hear this. Why should we pay money for these people sitting and listening to sounding and meditating? And
yeah,
there's just so much ignorance and lack of reflection. Really, lack of that frontal lobe. It's also reactive.
Yeah, that's a common reaction, and people don't realize, or they question why I waste my time dealing with, excuse me, these so-called animals that should be in prison, and who cares? I think a little deeper thought about that. I mean, it contradicts exactly what Jesus himself taught. I don't want to get religious, but in terms of visiting those in prison. Is really critical because they are humans. They are dealing with their own traumas. Particularly, I've met a lot of guys in prison. The crimes they committed are horrific. But you go back to their childhood, and you can't help but break down and cry because they're so horrific. The fact that their mom is pimping their sister out for drug money, and just the most horrific circumstances no kid should ever go through. They just really turn the stomach. We gotta open up and deal with this in a more intelligent way, because mass incarceration on an industrialized scale is not working. We're spending billions of dollars locking up more people than any other country in the world, and it's not working. We got to get smarter about this, and addressing the underlying trauma is the smarter way to go.
Good. And it's also money making. They make a lot of money from these prisons. So, Dr. Randall Bell, I cannot thank you enough. I hope you come back. You honor us at WHPC by being our guest, giving us your time. It was so precious. So thank you. And I want everyone to know again, Dr. Randall Bell is the author of Post-Traumatic Thriving, the art, science, and stories of resilience, real live stories, real people who have lived to tell the tale and actually can manage to benefit in some way from it and help others benefit. Will you come back, Dr. Randall Bell?
Anytime, Dr. Duffy. Thank you so much for having me, and I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Oh, that means so much to me. Thank you. And this is Dr. Duffy Spencer saying goodbye for now and wishing you great relationships.